The dining room smelled of roasted chicken polished silver, and the faint sweetness of vanilla candles flickering along the centerpiece. Mother-in-law, Janet, radiant in her tailored blouse and pearls, leaned across the table with a proud smile that only mothers could wear when celebrating milestones she deemed important. My daughter Emma tugged at my sleeve and whispered, with a grin, "When will it be your turn?" I lifted my wine glass slowly, letting the amber liquid catch the light, and returned her smile with calm certainty. It already happened. You just weren't there. The words landed like a soft but deliberate strike. Across the table, forks paused, mid-air champagne glasses wavered, and my sister blinked rapidly as though she had walked into a conversation meant for someone else. My father cleared his throat, a small cough that tried and failed to dispel the sudden hush. I sipped my wine, savoring the quiet that followed. At 62, I had learned to measure patience like a scale, to weigh my words and hold them until the moment they mattered most. Decades of being the background sister, the one whose presence was taken for granted, had taught me to wait, to watch, to choose the moment when my voice would be heard and my choices respected, not because they were celebrated, but because they were mine. Janet's eyes flicked toward me, and I saw a flicker of confusion ripple across her composed exterior. My sister's lips parted slightly, a silent question. The room held its collective breath, waiting for me to fill it with some explanation. I rested my glass on the table and smiled again, letting the pause do the work words could not. I had chosen my moment. Now it was time for them to reckon with it. The memory of the private celebration I had built with Henry 6 months ago drifted forward, reminding me that this night was only the beginning. I could still feel the faint sting of past gatherings long after the laughter and clinking glasses had faded. Weddings where I was assigned a seat at the very edge, holidays where my contributions were noticed, only if they matched some unspoken standard anniversaries, where my presence was tolerated rather than celebrated. Each event carried the same quiet message: I existed, but only as a background figure, a reflection of what they wanted to see. I thought about the societal expectations layered on women at my age. By 62, you were supposed to be poised, graceful, perhaps quietly retired, attentive to family rituals and milestone events. Deviate even slightly, and you risked judgment or worse, invisibility. That invisibility had been my companion for decades, a quiet shadow that clung to my movements at every family dinner, every holiday brunch, every celebratory toast. Henry had noticed. Always had. He had a way of observing without interference, of letting me feel my own choices, while quietly holding a mirror of support. When I hesitated at a family gathering, questioning whether to speak or retreat, he would gently squeeze my hand or offer a small smile, the kind that said, "I see you. You're not alone." That support, simple but unwavering, had become a lifeline. It gave me courage to choose my own moments, my own paths, even if the rest of the world had assigned me a lesser role. I thought about the assumptions that surrounded me tonight, the quiet judgments, the subtle comparisons to my sister, the questions hovering in the air about why certain milestones hadn't been broadcast or celebrated. They saw my life as incomplete, missing the public acknowledgments they prized. Yet my reality had been full choices, made promises, kept a private joy shared only with Henry and the life we had built together, separate from the family stage they expected me to occupy. The wine in my glass caught the soft light again, and I allowed myself a small inward smile, knowing the moments that mattered were not theirs to measure. The private celebration of months past had prepared me for this reckoning, and tonight would test whether they could finally see me as I truly was. 6 months ago, long before any candles flickered on Janet's birthday cake, Henry and I had chosen a different kind of celebration, one that required no audience, no approval, no carefully curated expectations. We had walked into the courthouse hand in hand, surrounded by nothing but the sound of our own laughter and the quiet hum of a small city morning. The clerk had smiled, asking for our identification, our vows, and in that ordinary moment, we had created something extraordinary. There had been no tiered cake, no matching linens, no photos in glossy frames for the family to admire. Just us, the soft blue sky above, and the simple, unbroken truth of our commitment. I had worn the dress I loved, not the one they might have approved, and I had smiled at Henry in a way that felt like reclamation, not performance. When it was over, we had exchanged a single photograph, a candid capture of spinning in the sunlight, our eyes locked full of joy. It was my proof, my quiet rebellion against years of invisibility. For decades, family celebrations had reminded me of my place, always polite, always measured, always a reflection of someone else's expectations. Every wedding, every milestone had been a subtle reminder that my life was to be admired from the sidelines, my choices judged and compared. Yet that morning at the courthouse, all of that had melted away. The world had narrowed to the two of us, and for the first time, I had felt fully seen, not by them, but by the person who mattered most. I remembered the relief, the joy, and the small, rebellious pride I carried with me afterward. That photograph, now tucked in a drawer in our apartment, had become a talisman of independence, a quiet statement that life could be rich, complete, and deeply satisfying without fanfare or approval. Tonight, as the family's eyes lingered on me across the birthday table, I knew that the truth of that morning would finally be revealed. Their assumptions, their judgments, their carefully rehearsed narratives would be challenged, and for the first time, I would see their reactions not through fear or hesitation, but through the calm certainty of a life fully claimed. The birthday dinner had settled into the familiar rhythm of polite conversation, punctuated by clinking silverware and the occasional toast. I let the conversation drift around the table, allowing the topics to hover just long enough before nudging them in subtle directions. A mention of travel, a reference to a quiet Saturday morning in the city, a casual smile at Henry's comment, all innocuous, yet each one a breadcrumb leading toward the truth I carried. My sister laughed at a memory of her own engagement, her eyes bright with the excitement of a life publicly displayed. I leaned in slightly, letting my tone carry a quiet weight. "It's remarkable how certain days stay with you," I said, swirling my wine gently. "Some celebrations feel larger because everyone is watching. Others are just ours." The words were soft, almost casual, but I noticed the tiny shift eyebrows rose, forks paused, and my mother-in-law's smile faltered for the briefest moment. Henry, seated beside me, offered no commentary, only a glance that spoke volumes. He had always understood the delicate balance of revealing too much and withholding the right measure until the moment demanded it. I had learned from him that restraint could sharpen curiosity, that patience could heighten impact. The conversation circled birthdays, anniversaries, and weddings. I allowed subtle jabs to slip into anecdotes, mentions of quiet moments I had treasured, of decisions made without audience approval. The room absorbed them, the tension growing like a slowly tightening cord. Faces shifted, murmurs softened. The familiar narrative of my life being invisible began to crack. By the time dessert was served, the room held its collective breath unknowingly, waiting for the revelation I had been guiding them toward. I set my fork down, smiled with deliberate calm, and allowed the pause to linger, knowing that the next words I spoke would change the tone of the evening entirely. Tonight, they would finally confront the life I had quietly claimed. I set my glass down with deliberate care, letting the gentle clink mark the shift in the room's rhythm. 6 months ago, I began my voice steady. Henry and I were married. The words landed softly at first, then seemed to echo against the walls as eyes widened and forks paused midair. My mother-in-law, Janet, blinked, her composed expression fracturing for the briefest moment. Married. You're what, she stammered, reaching instinctively for a hand that no longer needed her guidance. My father remained quiet, his gaze fixed on the table. Yet I could feel the weight of his attention settling on me, waiting for further explanation. My sister's lips parted, confusion flickering across her face. You're joking, she said, the sentence fragile, as though testing the ground beneath her assumptions. I shook my head gently. No, we went to the courthouse. Just the two of us. Simple, private, meaningful. My daughter's eyes sparkled with curiosity, a mixture of surprise and admiration. You didn't tell anyone, she asked, leaning forward, her elbows resting on the polished wood. I smiled at her. The bond of shared understanding bridging the gap between secrecy and revelation. No. Not out of shame, but protection. From comparisons. From expectations, from being measured by a standard that was never mine. Janet's hand trembled slightly as she reached for her wine glass, but she made no move to speak. My sister's gaze flicked downward, uncertain where to place her hands. You didn't invite anyone, she murmured. I lifted my chin, letting the certainty of my choices speak louder than any justification. We wanted a day that reflected our lives, not theirs. No one else needed to witness it for it to be real. The room held its breath, the space between us stretching taut with revelation. Henry reached across the table, his fingers brushing mine in quiet affirmation, and the calm in his touch reinforced the authority of my declaration. This is my life, I continued, fully claimed, fully ours. Not hidden, not ignored, but lived intentionally. The shift was palpable. Shock, disbelief, a flicker of guilt all moved like waves across their faces. The evening had changed. The narrative they had believed about me, my place in the family, my choices, it was no longer theirs to dictate. For the first time, I saw them confronting the life I had chosen, unfiltered and uncompromising, and I allowed the moment to settle fully before moving forward. You should have told us, Janet said finally, her voice carrying that practiced tremble she always used when trying to reclaim authority. As your mother-in-law, I had a right to be there. I met her gaze steadily, letting her words hang in the air without flinching. You had every right to your assumptions, I said, voice calm but firm. But you've spent decades assuming, directing, and defining my life without actually asking. I didn't tell you because I didn't need your permission or your approval. My sister shifted in her chair, glancing at our parents as though seeking silent support, but the expressions around the table were unreadable. You've always made things about yourself, she said, her voice quieter now, almost a question. I shook my head. I've always made choices that mattered to me, not to fit into someone else's expectations. That isn't selfish. That's self-respect. Janet's hand tightened around her wine glass. We thought we were part of your life, she said, almost whispering. I allowed a soft exhale, the weight of years pressing against my chest. You were part of my life only when it suited your narrative. Every wedding, every holiday, every milestone, you treated my presence as optional, invisible, when it didn't reflect what you wanted to see. You never asked if I wanted to participate. You assumed I wouldn't fit. The pause that followed was heavy, punctuated by the quiet clinking of silverware someone had absent-mindedly adjusted. I let it linger. I am not here to accuse or wound, I continued. I am here to state what has always been true. My life is my own, and my decisions are my responsibility. No one else gets to rewrite my story. Janet opened her mouth, perhaps to argue, but no words came. My father's eyes softened slightly, as if recognizing the truth without needing to speak it aloud. My sister looked down at her plate, cheeks warming, silent acknowledgement flickering in her expression. I leaned back slightly, the calm certainty of my assertion settling over the table. Tonight was not about conflict. It was about clarity, accountability without aggression. And with that understanding in place, the room shifted, preparing for the emotional reckoning that would follow. The room had grown still, a tense quiet stretching across the table as each person absorbed the weight of my words. Janet's fingers traced the edge of her napkin, knuckles pale, her pearls catching the soft glow of the chandelier. My sister's lips pressed together, eyes flicking from me to Henry, then back again, searching for some explanation that might make this revelation fit the story they had believed for so long. I allowed the silence to settle fully, letting it carry the truth without embellishment. Freedom felt tangible in that pause, a soft but undeniable presence that wrapped around me like a protective cloak. I had spoken, and nothing in the room could erase the choices I had made or the life I had built. Emma. My daughter shifted slightly in her seat and gave me a subtle, approving smile. It was quiet, almost imperceptible to anyone else, but it grounded me. Henry reached across the table, his fingers brushing mine in a gesture of unwavering support. In that touch, I felt the affirmation that had always mattered more than any applause or approval from the family around us. Janet's gaze softened, a restrained disapproval, lingering but tempered by the acknowledgement that her control had slipped. My sister looked down at her plate, her expression a mixture of confusion and reluctant recognition. None of them spoke yet. The unspoken understanding flowed between us. The narrative they had constructed no longer held power over me. I realized then, with a calm that surprised even me, that I did not need their validation. My life, my decisions, my happiness, they were mine to claim independent of their approval. For the first time in decades, the quiet confidence I had carried inwardly was visible outwardly, and it shifted the balance in a way words alone could never achieve. The silence stretched heavy, but not suffocating, carrying with it the full measure of freedom I had long sought. And as I let my hands rest on the table, I knew that the moments ahead would test that freedom, but nothing could undo the certainty I had found in claiming it. I stood slowly gathering my napkin and smoothing the folds with deliberate care. The room remained quiet, the tension lingering like a thin veil over the table. I gave no speech, offered no dramatic flourish, just a measured nod to Henry and a small acknowledging glance toward Emma. Janet opened her mouth, perhaps to insist I stay, but the words dissolved before they reached her lips. My sister shifted uncomfortably in her seat, eyes flicking between me and our parents, uncertain how to respond. I did not wait for their permission or their understanding. I simply stepped away, letting the weight of the night settle over them, carrying with it the realization that control had shifted, and I no longer needed it. As I walked to the car, memories of old gatherings and overlooked milestones drifted through my mind. I thought of the gifts tucked away in drawers, the photos of celebrations I had never truly been part of, and the framed mementos that had felt more like obligations than tokens of connection. I had lived decades in their shadow, but now I carried the authority to decide what remained and what was released. Back at home, I placed the items in a bag with quiet resolve. Nothing was done in anger or spite. Each photograph card and keepsake represented a choice I had made and the dignity I reclaimed by placing them elsewhere. The act itself was a punctuation mark, a closing of one chapter without requiring validation from the family who had long failed to see me. Henry stood by, silently understanding without comment, his presence, a reminder that acknowledgement could be found outside of the expected circles. Emma helped with the heavier items, her pride in me evident in the gentle way she handled each piece. I walked away from the bag lighter than I had felt in years, aware that closure could be created through personal choice alone, independent of the approval I had once sought. The next day, the memory of the evening still lingered, and I began to consider the small celebration that would follow, not for them, but for the life I had built with Henry. The following weekend, Henry and I hosted a small gathering on the porch of our Lakeview rental. Twinkle lights stretched across the wooden beams, and the scent of fresh flowers mingled with the soft evening air. Friends we had chosen, those who had been present in our lives through quiet triumphs and subtle joys, arrived, carrying homemade pies and laughter that felt effortless, genuine. For the first time in years, I felt the simple pleasure of being fully seen without expectation. No one critiqued table settings or questioned the order of events. No one measured my choices against some invisible standard. Each face reflected warmth and acceptance, a mirror of the life we had built together, free of judgment. Henry stood at my side quietly, guiding the flow of conversation, while offering me those small, grounding touches that reminded me I had earned this space. We celebrated the milestone not with ceremony or public announcement, but with honesty and intention. I recounted the morning of our courthouse wedding, sharing details that mattered to us, our vows, the crisp air, the unobserved smiles, and the room responded with laughter, clapping, and genuine questions that showed curiosity rather than critique. I could feel the weight of years of hidden joy lifting from my shoulders, replaced by a quiet pride that belonged wholly to me. Emma laughed as she helped serve desserts, her delight unburdened by family expectation. I watched her, aware that the lessons of self-worth and agency were now tangible, carried forward in small, meaningful ways. Every conversation, every gesture affirmed that celebration could exist outside the framework of tradition, that recognition was not required to validate experience. By the time the evening drew to a close, I felt a completeness that no family approval could have offered. The night was ours, authentic, joyous, and entirely true. As we cleared the last plates and folded the lights, I thought ahead to the quiet reflection that would follow, knowing that the next chapter of our lives required only the life we chose to lead. The morning after our small celebration, I carried the last box of old mementos to the donation bin on 7th Street. Framed photos, cards with well-meaning but distant messages, and a bridesmaid dress I never wore slipped into the container one by one. Nothing was done in anger. Each item was a symbol of release, a conscious decision to honor the life I had chosen rather than the life I had been assigned. Henry walked beside me, hands tucked in his pockets, offering quiet companionship without a single word. Emma skipped ahead, cheerful, helping carry the lighter items, her laughter a reminder that joy could be simple and unencumbered. Returning home, I felt the weight of decades lift from my shoulders. Freedom, choice, and the connections I had nurtured outside of family expectation defined the family I would continue to cherish. Names on birth certificates or chairs at a dinner table mattered far less than the people who had shown up, supported me, and celebrated life on their own terms. I set the empty box aside and sat by the window, watching sunlight ripple across the living room. In that calm, I understood something fundamental. My story was mine to write, my milestones, mine to celebrate, and my life, mine to lead. The quiet of the afternoon settled over us, and for the first time in years, I felt complete in the life I had created with intention, honesty, and love.